Excellent. Well, welcome everybody. My name is Stephen Couchman, and I'd like to thank everyone for taking the time to join us today. I'm pleased that in addition to research partners, we are joined by other performing arts educators in dance and theater, along with supporters and funders from across Canada, to celebrate the completion and official launch of the 4-year study on Symphony Student Education Programs in Canada. Before we go any further, a few little logistics. In the next 30 to 45 minutes, we will be providing highlights from the study, the full version of which can be found at measuredoutcome.org, and we'll send you a link to that site after the conference call. It's not up right now, but it will be later on this afternoon. You will also find there previous interim reports, which include additional materials and case studies. For the time being, we've muted the participants on the call to limit background noise, coughing, candy wrappers, cell phones, that sort of thing. That's the power of technology we have. Please feel free to type in questions or comments at any time. We'll also pause partway through the presentation and at the end for questions and additional comments. And you should see there on your screen, there's a place where you can put up your hands as well. I'd like to thank our research partners without whom this project would not have been possible. The Victoria Symphony Orchestra, the Calgary Philharmonic Orchestra, the Winnipeg Symphony Orchestra, Thunder Bay Symphony Orchestra, London Symphony Orchestra, Toronto Symphony Orchestra, Tafel Music, Ottawa Symphony Orchestra, and the National Arts Centre Orchestra. If not inclusive of all orchestras in Canada, this group provided a wonderful cross-section of small and large orchestras with a wide range of programs and resources devoted to student concerts on which to base this research. Also, Phil Bravo from Carnegie Hall for his contribution to the study, and Kate Einarson from McMaster Institute for Music and the Mind, who you'll be hearing from a little bit later on. Finally, none of this would have been possible without the input from thousands of teachers, students, and performers who contributed to the research. Looking back 4 years ago, it is worth remembering that this exercise was motivated by several factors. They include the desire of a major donor to education programs to better understand and quantify their impact, an opportunity for orchestras to collaborate on evaluation in order to improve quality of programs and extend reach, and a way to provide those responsible for orchestra education programs with a tool for communication with internal and external stakeholders. To this end, the study asked several important questions. What, if any, benefits do students gain from experiencing live symphony performances? Do performances aid teachers in delivery of the required curriculum? And what can be done to improve the quality and accessibility of these programs? I'd like to now turn to our lead investigator on this project, Rebecca Thomas, to provide highlights of the results. Rebecca?
Thank you, Stephen. Over the past 4 years, we have had some really amazing responses from thousands of students and hundreds of teachers across the country who participated in the symphony orchestra performances. The questions that we posed to the educators first off focused mainly on the process and experience of attending the performance, as well as any educational impact that the performance might have had on the students that they brought with them. The students themselves were given the option to answer the survey individually, mostly for the older kids, or as a class for the younger kids. Overall, the teachers used the survey in both formats as an in-class exercise to talk about the event and to sort of relive the experience after the children returned to school. About 57% of the students who filled out the surveys were in the grades 4 to 6 range, so this was our largest feedback group of students. In the second year of the study, we introduced a performing artists survey, which we had 191 respondents for over the years. There were 5 symphonies who were able to reach out to their artists, and our focus of this aspect of the study was to capture the experience from the other side of the stage. I might add that this study spanned 2 teachers' job action strikes as well, one in BC and one in Ontario, and yet the responses to the surveys remained consistent throughout, which impressed us. To look at the educator results first, we know this, but we also have seen in the results that highly engaged teachers are really the key to the success of these programs. Attendance frequency across the 4 years of the study is interesting to look at. Consistently, the largest group across all 4 years of the study was the 0 to 3 times group, as you can see on the chart. So how many times teachers have brought their students to a performance. Diving a bit deeper into this data, we find that although there is a core group of highly motivated teachers who regularly brings classes to concerts, the greatest percentage overall of teachers bring classes on an inconsistent basis every couple of or every few years instead of every year. These occasional attendees did not increase their participation over the 4 years of this study. There are a few variables to consider that we've talked about, and we've talked about them in a little bit more detail in the report. One thing we did learn is that once teachers recognize the value of attending symphony performances, they're more likely to bring students in the future. They're also more likely to make use of study guides, access other programs provided by the symphonies, as well as advocate within the school system. These core teachers demand quality and variety in programming, and care must be taken to communicate regularly with them, as well as provide useful supplemental materials for the performances. Speaking of which, marketing communication is also one of the keys to program success. A majority of attendees, at 42%, responded to a mailing to the school. Only 13% found out through the Symphony website, and only 12 knew of the programming through word of mouth. This means that despite living in a technological world, physical mailings and personal contact are still the most effective form of awareness and outreach. One trend that we did notice as a result of the job action events actually was that the Symphony education managers who had the strongest personal relationships with individual educators were the most likely to maintain continued attendance and support throughout the years. That's even through the teacher strikes. Study guide and podcast use results depended on what each symphony had to offer, but when offered, 70% of teachers used them as an in-class guides prior to the performance. And I think that's a pretty high percentage. That's a pretty good uptake. The ones who did use them, that 70%, were incredibly enthusiastic about them as well, citing them oftentimes as being invaluable to their whole experience with the symphony. Some teachers who did not have access to podcasts or CDs actually asked for them in the comments section of the survey, so clearly this is something that excites teachers. Both the guides and the podcasts were used, as we've said, as in-school teaching aids, not as at-home enrichment activities. The quality of the experience for the students often hinges on the knowledge of the teacher who's bringing them. And as we all know, teachers are an overworked bunch these days, and making education material available to them is a huge bonus for them. Use of these materials yields a more engaged teacher and student audience and a more likely repeat attendee. In these days of limited budgets, repeat attendance at performances often hinges on whether the experience, as we've just said, proved a good platform for student learning. Consistently over the 4 years of the study and across multiple symphonies, each offering unique programs, 85% of all teachers stated that the performances were a good way for their students to learn. Now, there was a group, as you can see at the end of the first graph, that at 11% who did not feel that there was a strong educational value, but we didn't receive any comments from them about their experience, and this would be an important group of people to follow up with in the future, as their comments would definitely provide some insight, further insight. Also in the second graph, a really high percent, 94% of teachers wanted to or planned to bring their students back to the symphony. Of the teachers who did not plan to, who knew that they weren't coming back, many cited financial issues or the need to balance their budget and attendance with exposure to other arts programs like art galleries and dance, etc. Which brings us to the student results.
Great, thank you, Rebecca. As Rebecca mentioned earlier, over the course of this study, we had responses from 3,422 students who contributed to the evaluation, either as a class project, so it was a teacher-facilitated exercise, or by completing individual surveys. As many of you will appreciate, the responses from students was overwhelmingly positive and often quite fun. There are many pictures and very cute comments from students, some of which are included in the reports. Statistically, the only notable change over the course of the research was the frequency rate of participation by students, which showed a reduced rate of multiple visits to orchestras. Like many statistics, this creates more questions than answers. It is possible that this trend is associated with the reduced overall numbers of responses in the final year of the study due to teacher job actions. It also may be that fewer students are attending concerts with their families and friends over time, and or the results increasingly grade-specific programming. We're not sure about this. It's one of those ones that you just want to ask more questions about. What is overwhelmingly clear, and Rebecca, if you could move to the next slide, is that the majority of students depend on school programs as their only access to live orchestral performances, as indicated in the first graph. As well, it is wonderful to see that in a time when young people are increasingly wired in, given the option of listening to or watching performances electronically, students would much prefer to attend live performances at 82% over the 11 for watching and 7 for recorded. Rebecca.
For the third and final survey, what we thought was, who better to talk about audience engagement than the performers themselves. I was actually personally really interested in this section of the study, which asked the artists about their thoughts and experiences with the educational programs. One of the first questions we asked them was whether attending was how they became musicians. 57% of the musicians said they became musicians because they attended a student performance when they were young, which is a pretty big influencer. 95% of the artists responded enthusiastically about participating in the programs, and they thought personally that they were a really good way for students to learn, and they are very keen to engage new and younger audiences. The artists were generous and very practical with suggestions about what works well from their perspective and how the programs could be improved. What really struck me was the similarity in what the artists and the students had to say. Both groups share very similar comments and observations about the whole experience, and that's outlined a little bit more in the full report, but oftentimes comments that we received from the performing artists would be virtually identical to comments that we received from the children. So clearly the connection between the performer and the student audience member is an incredibly strong one. Student engagement is a key to the successful education experience, and performers know what engages the students, which is overall familiar and relatable music. Both groups consistently asked for more one-on-one interaction with each other. Direct and experiential learning, where possible, is also a huge draw for both groups. I'd just like to stop for a minute and pause. We will have questions at the end as well, but if anybody has any questions immediately, you can raise your hand on the little dashboard, or you can type me a question as well. We will have questions at the end as well. What I'd like to do now is unmute her and introduce Kate Einarson, who is a PhD candidate at the Auditory Development Lab at the McMaster Institute for Music and the Mind. And Kate, in addition to being an awesome person, was also the person who wrote the literature review, which will be featured in the report. The report itself has the bibliography for the literature review. There will be an expanded bibliography for those who are interested, available on the website this afternoon as well. So Kate, can I hand it over to you?
Thanks, Rebecca. Thank you very much for having me today. I really enjoyed being part of this project. I think the data that were generated from these survey responses are absolutely fascinating. So what I set out to do for the literature review in this report is to give a brief overview of some of the published peer-reviewed scientific evidence that speaks to music participation in childhood. when you do see the final report, you'll probably notice that there's almost two sections in the way that we've considered these questions. There's a rapidly growing interest in examining the effects of music training and music participation in childhood and across the lifespan in the scientific community. That being said, most of the research that's been done to date has been on outreach programs that focus on participation and training. So programs that offer music making opportunities to children. There's a very interesting gap in the literature, for the most part, examining the types of projects that we're talking about today. So these outreach concerts, these performances, and these interpersonal interactions. So the first part of the lit review speaks a bit to the research outcomes that have to do with the effects of music training on musical and extra musical abilities. So changes in IQ, in executive functioning, in language skills, in spatial skills, in memory. But perhaps, I think more interestingly to this group, there are a few research findings that have implications for outreach concerts. So one that I think aligns very well with some of the findings that Rebecca and Stephen are talking about is that children and performers reported wanting to interact with each other more and wanting to sort of get to know each other better and have more participatory experiences. Music participation and engaging in music with other people is increasingly being shown in the literature to improve cooperation, empathy, social inclusion, and other sort of extra musical activities. So I think it's an interesting idea to consider whether there are ways we can get children engaging with these concerts as opposed to being passive observers. This is something that both the children and the performers report as being interested in. And I think it's worth exploring that. Perhaps a second thing that is interesting to think about is that we saw, and Rebecca and Stephen have talked about, that by and large, the majority of students only have access to orchestral music through these school concerts. Very few students are reporting attending these concerts with family or friends. And the research that is interesting in this context shows that likelihood of participation in artistic and cultural activities, not just music activities, but dance, visual art, and other art forms, correlates very directly with family income level. So I think what that tells us is something we're probably aware of, which is that not only are very few children attending these types of performances, but the children who are unable to attend are disproportionately of lower socioeconomic status. So there's very robust barriers to access to the arts when children don't have school-based opportunities in the public school system. So I think that has implications both for attendance and for audience building in the future. This is a real point of first contact for these children, and it's also a way of reaching audiences who otherwise wouldn't have access to these types of art forms. If anyone would like to explore any of these ideas more, as Rebecca said, there's a full reference list available, and I'd be happy to talk with people farther from musical organizations or from other arts organizations about ways this could inform or answer questions.
Thank you so much, Kate. I'll make sure that in the follow-up email to everybody that I include Kate is the best way on your Twitter handle or email.
Email is probably best, but I'd certainly be happy to interact with everyone.
I'll make sure that I include your email then on the follow-up email to this so everybody can have access to you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kate. One of the things that we really like to feature in the reports, and we have done in previous reports, specifically with the symphonies, are case studies. In this report that we're launching today, we're thrilled to feature 4 case studies of successful symphony education programs, 3 of them from Canada and 1 from our awesome partners in Carnegie Hall. Each of these programs is unique, and yet each delivers an engaging student experience. The programs we featured all have strong collaborative aspects to them as well. That's collaborating with the artists, with other orchestras, and with the community around them. Further write-ups and details on these programs are in the published report, so I encourage you to read the full report for more details on these programs. I also might add that, again, as I mentioned earlier, earlier versions of the study report also feature case studies from other orchestras that are very worth reading about, and those reports are also available on our website. And I'd like to thank the partners who participated for sharing their images and their wonderful programs with us for this report. We also received a lot of feedback. We asked all of the survey and study participants to give us feedback. We received a lot of amazing feedback from all three participant groups. Each of our Symphony partners in the study received their individual feedback from their participants, and we've brought a sampling of their responses and suggestions to this presentation, and there are even more in the published report. As mentioned when we were talking about the artist study, the similarity of responses between the three groups shows a consistency of experience and gives clear direction and feedback into what is working and what could be improved with the education programs, which leads us to next steps.
Thanks, Rebecca. Through the course of the study, educators, performers, students, and our research partners identified many ways that outreach and programs could be enhanced. Of course, rather than wait 4 years to implement, many of you on the call have been actively building the plane as you fly it, and numerous creative, inspirational developments have taken place while the study has been underway. The case studies presented earlier, just now, are only a few examples of the innovations which have taken place. I'll just quickly go over some of the themes which were explored, and I'm sure these will be the stuff of future discussion and activity. First one, around value proposition. The greatest barrier to more students attending symphony performances is the perceived value of these experiences held by teachers. The message to teachers needs to be simple and clear that this is a unique experience every child should be exposed to, and which will help them be better educators in the long run. Students and the rest of us, as we've discussed also throughout this conversation, respond well and remember participatory education opportunities, interactive activities, play-alongs, ambassador programs, having students perform on stage or watch their peers perform on stage, concert talkbacks, etc., only improve the experience. Now, 70% use of curriculum materials is not bad, but 80 or 90 would certainly be better. So the increasing the use of curriculum materials and working collaboratively as well on development of materials is a very valuable exercise. The elephant in the room, as many of you know, is transportation. Transportation costs are an issue shared by all performing arts organizations and school boards. This issue is not going to go away. There are potentially ways to mitigate the issue, which should be explored further. Along the same lines as the value proposition, ways to increase direct contact with educators and improve communication can only help to embed programs in school calendars. Also, working together on things such as bulk ticket sales and shared offerings with other arts groups can't hurt. Along these lines, all boats rise with the tide. Though education programs may not be very strong within the orchestra cosmos, when you work together, such as with the hockey sweater and the Carnegie Hall programming, everybody benefits. So greater collaboration is definitely a priority. There were some examples in which the results of collective agreements between musicians and orchestras had an unintentional negative consequence for educational programs. It's worth ensuring that educational programs are part of these conversations when these things come around. The other common theme as far as feedback goes was poor behavior, the fact that poor behavior affects everyone in the concert hall. This was the most common constructive comment by teachers and students and performers as well. Education coordinators should be very clear about the consequences of two groups for which the teachers have not properly prepared their students or do not supervise their classes. This should include temporary bans of schools which consistently detract from the experience of others. And I know this is a difficult thing for some of you because on one hand, you must manage these behaviors, and on the other hand, you're responsible for filling the hall. So it's a tough position to take, but it's one that's affecting other participants and should be addressed. There's been some discussion about the possibility of conductor training regarding education programs, and all that I can say about that one is stay tuned. There may be more to follow. Though certainly not for everyone, many musicians identified that they would like to be more involved in program design and outreach. So creating that opportunity for the musicians' active involvement is also strongly recommended. And finally, as you would expect from measured outcome, orchestras are encouraged to continue the measurement and continuous improvement of the education programs. So that provides a very high level of the report, and I'd like to open it up now. We have a few more minutes. If anybody has any questions or comments at this time, we'd love to be able to field them.
And again, I think you can either raise your hand or you can actually type a question in. I hope everybody has that in their control panel bar if anybody does have questions.
I had a question for Kate, actually. Put you on the spot, Kate.
Hi.
Hi, just listening to the literature review. I mean, in your kind of dream, you said, you know, there were definitely some gaps in the research. What kind of follow-up research could you see being of value in order to fill the gap that exists right now?
Well, part of the reason I think this gap exists is because we're farther along in knowing how to assess things like IQ or vocabulary or memory abilities. So that's something where we can standardize our results. And I think part of the reason that there's a certain amount of research gap in the sense that I'm talking about it is that when we do the type of work that you and Rebecca have been talking about today with this wonderful survey data and attendance data, is that often everyone has a different outcome variable that they're interested in. So we have to explore, you know, not only do schools come back, but maybe which ones are and which ones aren't. And you and Rebecca have done a good job of outlining, for example, figuring out a bit more about the 10% of teachers who report that these experiences aren't valuable. I think a real key is to, as you've started to do here, outline exactly what it is we want to know about these education concerts. You know, what is our successful education concert? What does it look like? So that's an open-ended answer, but you know, this is a great discussion to be having, because I think maybe the scientists haven't necessarily been talking to the orchestra musicians until we started doing work like this.
Great, thank you. Any other questions at this time?
I don't see any other right now.
All right, great, seeing none. So, just to sum up some of the results that we've come up with in this research. 85% of educators said that the educational concerts are a good way for their students to learn. 82% of students prefer live performance over recorded listening experience. 74% of educators said concerts assist them in delivering the required music curriculum. 57% of performers said their choice to become a musician was influenced by attending a student concert when they were young. 70% of teachers made use of orchestras provided educational support materials, and for 57% of students, educational concerts provide their only exposure to live orchestral music. Not bad all around. I think you should all be very proud of these kind of results. If there are no other questions, I'd like to thank everyone for participating today. Please download the full report, which we will distribute via email shortly, or the link via email shortly. Share it with others who you believe would find it useful or interesting, and tweet away. If you have any additional questions or comments, we'd love to hear from you. Please contact Rebecca, Kate, or myself. And finally, the three of us are available for weddings and bar mitzvahs, but seriously, we've recorded this session. It will be available online shortly. And if you would find it helpful for us to present to other groups, we will do our best to oblige. Lastly, to our partners on the call and those who couldn't join us today, those of you who are directly involved in the delivery of music education programs, thank you. It is a challenging and I hope a rewarding work that clearly makes a difference in the lives of young people across Canada. You all do very wonderful work. Thanks all for joining us, and we look forward to speaking with you all again soon. Take care. Bye for now.